Welcome to Ancient Nights. This is a storytelling channel. Every story you will hear here is drawn from the ancient world, told in order, from the very beginning of time, moving forward through the centuries, one story at a time. Most of what we tell comes directly from the Bible. Tonight is one of those nights. Tonight we tell the story of Cain and Abel, the first two brothers who ever lived, and what happened between them. Last time we told the story of the garden, of how the first man and the first woman crossed a single boundary, and how everything changed. Tonight we step outside the garden, into the harder world that came after, a world where the ground no longer gave its fruit freely. And it is in this world that the first children were born. Adam and Eve had left the garden behind, and in the world outside they began a family. Eve gave birth to a son and named him Cain. And when he was born, she said, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." There is joy in those words. The first woman, holding the first child ever born, marveling at this new life, recognizing it as a gift. And then she gave birth again to a second son and named him Abel. Two brothers, the first two brothers who ever lived. Cain, the elder, Abel, the younger. And as they grew, they took up different work. Abel became a keeper of sheep, a shepherd who led his flock to pasture and watched over them through the seasons. Cain became a worker of the ground, a farmer who planted and tended and harvested, pulling food from the earth by the sweat of his brow. The farmer and the shepherd, both honorable, both necessary, two brothers doing their work as people have done ever since. Here, for a moment, let us step gently outside the pages of the Bible and look at the world these two brothers lived in through the eyes of history. Because the story of a farmer and a shepherd, standing side by side at the dawn of the human family, touches on one of the greatest turning points in all of human history. For most of the human story, people did not farm and did not herd. They gathered what grew wild and hunted what they could find, moving across the land in small groups, following the seasons, never staying long in one place. They built no cities, kept no fields, owned little more than they could carry. This was how human beings lived for an immense stretch of time, far longer than all of recorded history put together. And then, in a region historians call the Fertile Crescent, a great arc of land across what is now the Middle East, the very lands where these stories are set, something changed. Slowly, across many generations, human beings learned to plant seeds and harvest crops and to tame animals and keep flocks. Historians call this the Neolithic Revolution, and its effect was total. For the first time, people could settle in one place. They could grow their food instead of chasing it, keep herds instead of hunting. Let us imagine for a moment what daily life became in those first settled communities. A family no longer wandered. They built a house of mud brick, of stone, of timber, and they stayed. They cleared a field nearby and planted it with wheat and barley. They kept goats and sheep in pens. The day was shaped by the rhythms of the land, rising with the sun to tend the crops, leading the animals to water, grinding grain into flour between two stones, storing food against the lean months of winter. And from this change came everything else. When people could store food, some had more than others, and the idea of wealth was born. When people lived close together in growing villages, they needed rules to live by, and the first laws began to form. Crafts appeared, pottery to store grain, weaving to make cloth, tools of polished stone. Villages grew into towns, and towns in time into the first cities. Trade, writing, law, civilization itself, all of it grew from this single great change. The change from wandering to settling, from gathering to farming, from hunting to herding. And at the very center of that change stood two ways of life. The farmer, who worked the ground and stayed in one place, and the shepherd, who kept the flocks and often moved with them in search of pasture, the very two figures who stand at the center of this ancient story. Two brothers, representing the two ways of life that, between them, built the foundations of every civilization that would ever come. And history has long noticed something, that throughout the ancient world, the settled farmer and the wandering herder often lived in an uneasy relationship. They needed each other, the farmer's grain, the herder's wool and meat, but they also competed for land, for water, for survival. The tension between the field and the flock runs through the whole of ancient history. This is the world the two brothers lived in, a world at the very dawn of settled life. And it is in this world that the first great tragedy of the human family took place. There is something else worth understanding about this ancient world, the place that worship held within it. In these first settled communities, religion was not separate from daily life. It was woven into everything. The people who first learned to farm lived at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves: the sun, the rain, the seasons, the fertility of the soil and the flock. A single dry season could mean starvation. A single good harvest could mean survival through the winter. And so, from the very beginning of settled life, human beings looked upward and gave thanks and asked for blessing. Archaeologists who have dug into the oldest settlements of the Fertile Crescent have found, again and again, the signs of this. Small altars, figurines, places set apart for offering. Some of the very oldest structures ever built by human hands were not houses and not storehouses. They were temples, places of worship, places where people brought the first and the best of what they had and offered it to the powers they believed watched over them. To bring an offering, then, was one of the most natural and important things a person of this age could do. It was how you said, "Thank you." It was how you asked for protection. It was how you acknowledged that your life, your harvest, your flock, were not entirely in your own hands. Every ancient people did it. And so when Cain and Abel each brought an offering to God, they were performing the most fundamental act of the ancient religious world, bringing a gift from their own labor and laying it before the divine. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought an offering, the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. To understand this moment, it helps to know that across the entire ancient world, the offering was one of the most important acts a person could perform. In every early civilization, in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, among every ancient people, human beings brought gifts to their gods, the first fruits of the harvest, the finest animal of the flock. To give to the divine the best of what one had grown or raised was, in the ancient mind, the highest act of devotion and gratitude. So when Cain and Abel each brought an offering, they were doing something that would have been instantly understood by every ancient culture, presenting a gift from their own work, their own livelihood, to God. But notice the difference in how the text describes the two gifts. Of Cain, it says simply that he brought an offering of the fruit of the ground. Of Abel, it says he brought the firstborn, the first and best of what he had, and the fat portions, which in the ancient world were considered the richest, most valuable part of the animal. Abel did not just bring an offering, he brought the best of what he had. The difference is small in words, but it points to the heart behind the gift. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. The text does not tell us exactly why, but the oldest understanding is this, that it was not about crops versus animals, but about the heart. Abel gave his first and his best out of genuine devotion. Cain gave simply something, perhaps held back, offered without the same love. The text says God looked at the man first, and then the gift. It was not only what was on the altar that mattered, It was the heart of the one who placed it there. And Cain knew his offering had not been accepted. And the text says, Cain was very angry, and his face fell. And here we come to the heart of the story. Because what happens next is not really about crops or sheep or altars. It is about something that lives in every human heart, something as old as humanity itself. Jealousy, rivalry between brothers, the pain of feeling that another has been favored over you. It is worth saying that this feeling, the ache of being the one passed over, is one of the most ancient and universal of all human experiences. It appears in the oldest stories of nearly every culture on earth. Brothers who compete, the younger favored over the elder, or the elder over the younger, the wound of comparison. It is as if the human family from its very beginning understood that some of the deepest dangers we face come not from strangers or enemies, but from within our own homes, our own families, our own hearts. Cain was the elder, the firstborn. In the ancient world, the firstborn son held a place of special honor, and yet here it was the younger brother's gift that was accepted, and the elder's that was not. We can only imagine what stirred in Cain, the confusion, the wounded pride, the sense that the natural order had been overturned, that he, the elder, had been set beneath his younger brother. And here is one of the most tender moments in the story. God did not leave Cain alone with his anger. He came to him and he spoke. The Lord said, "Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Listen to what God is saying. First, hope. This is not the end, Cain. The door back is still open. Do well, and you will be accepted. And then, a warning in a vivid image. Sin is crouching at the door, like a wild animal, low to the ground, waiting to spring. The anger in Cain's heart was a doorway, and something dangerous was waiting just outside it. But, and this is the most important word, you must rule over it. God did not say sin would master Cain. He said the opposite. He told Cain he had the power to master it, to not let the crouching thing through the door. The choice was Cain's. A warning given in love, a door left open, a clear choice placed before a man. You can rule over this. You do not have to let it in. But Cain did not listen. Cain spoke to his brother Abel. And while they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. The first death, the first murder, the first time one human being took the life of another. And it happened between brothers, the first two brothers who ever lived. The text is spare. It does not dwell on the violence. It simply tells us what Cain did. The crouching thing had come through the door. All of it. The anger, the wounded pride, the resentment Cain had not ruled over, had grown in the darkness of his heart into something monstrous. And in a field, somewhere outside the garden, the first human being to die lay still, and his brother stood over him. And then, as he had in the garden, God came. The Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" It echoes the question from the garden, "Where are you?" The same God, still coming, still seeking out the one who has done wrong, giving him a chance to speak. And Cain answered with one of the most chilling replies in all of Scripture. He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" A lie, and a question thrown back almost in defiance. And the terrible irony is this: Abel was a keeper. Abel kept sheep. He watched over them, protected them. And here is Cain, refusing the very thing his brother had done so faithfully. Refusing responsibility. Refusing care. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer the rest of the Bible gives, echoing through every story that follows, is yes. Yes, you are. We are all, in some sense, keepers of one another. And God said, "What have you done?" Not a question for information, a cry of grief. And then, "The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." The voice of your brother's blood. As if Abel, though dead, was not silent. As if his blood, soaked into the earth, cried out. As if no act of violence, however hidden, could ever truly be hidden from God. The blood cried out. The earth testified. The truth could not be buried. This is one of the most powerful ideas in all of Scripture, that the suffering of the innocent is never silent before God, that justice is never simply forgotten. And then came the consequence. God said, "Now you are cursed from the ground which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." For Cain, the farmer, this was devastating. The ground, the source of his living, the soil he had worked all his life, would no longer yield to him, and he himself would become a wanderer, with no home, no rest. The farmer, who had settled and stayed, was now condemned to wander, sent back, in a way, to the restless life that came before farming itself. And Cain cried out, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." For the first time we hear not defiance in Cain's voice, but fear. And here something remarkable happens. It would be easy to imagine God simply turning away, leaving the first murderer to his fate. But instead the Lord said, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would attack him. Even Cain, even the first murderer, even the man who lied to God's face, was not abandoned. God placed a mark of protection on him. The consequences were real and heavy. He would wander. He would be restless. But God did not destroy him. Even in judgment, there was mercy. Justice and mercy held together. That mark, the mark of Cain, has echoed through history in a way few details of any ancient story ever have. For thousands of years people have spoken of the mark of Cain, wondered what it was, argued over its meaning. The text itself does not tell us what the mark looked like. It tells us only what it was for: protection. A sign that this man, despite everything, was not to be harmed, that he remained even in his exile under a kind of divine guard. It is worth pausing on how unusual this is. In the ancient world, justice was often simple and severe: a life for a life, blood for blood. The one who killed was killed in turn. Whole systems of law across the ancient Middle East were built on this principle of exact retribution. And yet here, at the very first murder in the human story, God does something different. He does not demand Cain's life in exchange for Abel's. He pronounces a real and heavy consequence: exile, restlessness, a ground that will no longer yield. But he also protects the guilty man from being killed. Justice and mercy, held together in a single act. It is one of the earliest glimpses in all of Scripture of a God who is not only just, but merciful, who holds the two together in ways that human justice often cannot. And so Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in a land called Nod, east of Eden. Nod, a word that means wandering. He settled, in a sense, in the land of restlessness itself. And there, life went on. The text tells us something striking. Cain built a city. The first city ever mentioned in the Bible was built by the first murderer. And in this, there is an echo of real history. For it was indeed in these ancient lands, in the millennia after farming began, that the first cities of the world rose from the plains, walls of mud brick, streets, houses crowded together, places where thousands of people lived side by side for the first time. Archaeologists tell us that some of the oldest cities in the world rose in exactly these lands, settlements like the ancient town of Jericho, whose foundations reach back many thousands of years, or Catalhoyuk, far to the north, where thousands of people once lived crowded together in houses of mud brick, entered through the roof, their walls painted with scenes of hunting and of the wild. These were among the first places on earth where human beings gathered in great numbers to live side by side. And with that gathering came everything that cities bring: cooperation and conflict, trade and rivalry, the best of what humans can build together, and the worst of what they can do to one another. The human story, even through the line of the one who had done this terrible thing, continued to build, to grow, to fill the earth. But Abel was gone. The shepherd, the younger brother, the one who brought the first and the best, the first human being to die, killed by his own brother. Let us return, before we close, to the single most important sentence in this whole story. The words God spoke to Cain before the deed was done. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. It is one of the oldest pieces of wisdom ever written down about the human heart. And it says something remarkable. It says that the dark feeling, the anger, the jealousy, the wounded pride, is not in itself the thing that destroys us. The feeling comes to the door. It crouches there. It desires us. But it has not yet come in. And whether it comes in or not depends on us. You must rule over it. Not, you are helpless before it. Not, it will surely master you. But, you have the power to rule over it. The door is yours to guard. This is a truth that every human being in every age has had to learn, that we cannot always choose what we feel. Cain did not choose to feel that first sting of rejection, but we can choose what we do with what we feel. We can guard the door, or we can open it. We can rule over the crouching thing, or we can let it in. Cain heard these words spoken directly to him, clearer than any of us will ever hear them. And still, he opened the door. That is the sorrow at the very heart of this story. Not that he was tempted, but that he had been given everything he needed to overcome the temptation and chose not to use it. And what of Abel? What can we say about the younger brother whose life was so short? Abel speaks not a single word in the entire story. We are never told what he said, what he thought, what he felt. He is the keeper of sheep. He brings the first and the best of his flock. And then he is gone, silent, in a field, at the hand of his own brother. His whole presence in the story is quiet. A faithful man, doing his work, bringing his best, and then falling silent forever. And yet, the text tells us, his blood cried out. Though he spoke no words in life, his blood spoke after his death. Though he was silent, he was not forgotten. God heard him. God remembered him. There is comfort in this, for anyone who has ever felt small or overlooked or unheard. Abel was the younger brother. He held no power. He spoke no famous words. He died young. And yet his life mattered. His death mattered. God heard the voice of his blood crying out from the ground. In the eyes of God, the quiet, faithful life is never overlooked, even if the world passes it by, even if it is cut short, even if no one seems to notice. That life is seen. That life is remembered. It is, on the surface, a story about two brothers and two offerings. But beneath that, it is a story about the human heart, about what happens when we are wounded, when we feel passed over, when we see another accepted and ourselves rejected. Cain's anger was not in itself the worst thing. Anger is human. The wound he felt was real. What mattered was what he did with it. God had told him clearly, "Rule over it. Do not let it through the door." The tragedy of Cain is not that he felt anger. It is that he did not rule over it. He let it grow in the darkness until it destroyed his brother and his own life as well. Before we leave this story, there is a question it quietly places before us. The same question it has placed before every person who has heard it, across all the thousands of years since it was first told. And the question is this: what will we do with the wound? Because every one of us at some point will feel what Cain felt. Not the murder, but the wound that came before it. We will bring something of ourselves into the world, our work, our effort, our heart, and we will watch it passed over while another's is received. We will feel the sting of being second, the ache of being overlooked, the quiet burn of watching someone else receive what we longed for. And in that moment the door will be there, and the crouching thing will be just outside it. And we will have a choice. The same choice Cain had. We can feed the wound and nurse the resentment and let our face fall and stay fallen until the bitterness hardens into something that destroys us. Or we can do the harder thing. We can hear, across all these thousands of years, the words spoken to the first man who ever faced this choice. You must rule over it. We can guard the door. We can refuse to let the crouching thing through. The story does not pretend this is easy. It tells us, in fact, that it is desperately hard, so hard that the very first man to face it failed. But it also tells us in the clearest words that the choice is real, that we are not helpless, that the door is ours to guard, and underneath it all the steady presence of the God who keeps coming, who came before the deed with a warning, who came after with both justice and mercy, who heard the voice of Abel's blood and did not forget. A dark story, but never without a thread of light running through it. And so we leave them tonight. Abel, the shepherd, whose blood cried out from the ground, remembered all these thousands of years later as the first innocent life taken. And Cain, the wanderer, marked and protected even in exile, carrying the weight of what he had done into the land of restlessness, east of Eden. Next week, the human story continues. The generations multiply, the world fills with people. But something dark is spreading through that world, from heart to heart. And there is one man who still walks with God. His name is Noah. The story of what God asked him to build, and the waters that came after, we will tell it together next time.